Well, the offense obviously starts with Cousins in this passing game with how this has exploded necessarily. And no, it's not necessarily the whole, it was just a weak secondary thing, 2 weeks in a row. It was not one of those. So don't worry. Because once again, this is the second week in a row I'm doing this type of video where, like, last week it was like, oh, what can we take away from that Giants win, since everyone's telling us it's nothing, when I thought, like, well, that play calling was much different, though. I thought that's what we could take away from it, that's what this actual offense is supposed to be. And we saw it again last Sunday against Philadelphia, where everything kind of translated over in terms of how they did it. There was a lot of getting Cousins out in the move and things like that. They had a lot of crossers with a lot of deep over the tops, but Philadelphia didn't cover Diggs over the top, so that we didn't get the Thielen yards after catch game. And just to put this in perspective, I'm going to, now that we have 4 of these games, in their last 2 wins, they played Atlanta and the Raiders. Also 2 weak secondaries. I think we would all agree at this point. So in total, Cousins threw 31 passes in those games. That's 2 combined games. He went 23 of 31 for 272. He did average 11.8 yards a completion, which isn't bad. He did score 2 touchdowns and didn't throw a pick, but these last 2 weeks in 5 and 6, this is the real difference here. So the uptake went from 31 to 56, and he completed 44 of these passes for 639 yards, and he's completing, and his average completion is 14 and a half yards. We're not seeing any more CJ Ham, in other words. We're seeing Thielen and Diggs really come up these last 2 weeks, which is really, really nice. We're starting to see more chunk plays. He's thrown 6 touchdowns in this 2-game winning streak so far, and he has thrown 1 interception, which is on pretty much entirely on Diggs. And then you go into the actual carrying of the football, which is, weeks 1 and 3, 76 carries for 383 yards, a 5.0 average, 6 touchdowns, and their longest run was 25. However, in weeks 5 and 6, they did carry it 69 times, so that's only 7 times less for 333 yards, a 4.8 average, and only 1 score. But their long was 41, so they got a bigger explosive out of it. But to me, it's kind of obvious, which is after Thielen and Diggs kind of yelled at whoever that was directed at, whether that was necessarily directed at the coaches for how that offense was being called, or Cousins, or whoever that may be. I think it was Zimmer who got his hand way too involved in that, because he was almost overcorrecting it from last season, when in 2018, when it was like, oh, we would get to like maybe between 10 and 15 carries, and then we would just stop and just start throwing. It was almost like he didn't even want to get to 20 passes, because once again, in those 2 wins, right, they averaged 15 and a half pass attempts to 38 carries. And that went to 28 pass attempts and 34 and a half carries after that happened. And it seems like they brought this closer to a 2019 offense and a little bit further away from the offense they were running, which belonged in 1992, probably. So I just think it was mostly Zimmer who had his hand in there, being like, well, I want to play defense and I want to run the ball, and this is all like, it's the tough guy, most footballiest football man you have ever seen, football thing. And I really think it's just that. And then when Diggs and Thielen got mad, I think the offensive guys kind of took over their side again, which was kind of nice to see, because I don't think we would have been talking about a 4-2 team otherwise. And I don't think we'll always have this type of success, though, whenever we're playing a team. Like, obviously, Philadelphia had hurt corners, and then some of these corners, they didn't even look like they belonged in the NFL at times. So there's that. I don't know what happened to Sidney Jones. remember watching him at Washington. I know he tore the Achilles at the pro day, but we've seen players come back for torn Achilles before. I think he kind of forgot how to play football, but that's not the point. And I think all this shows is the start. Like, this offense is actually starting to look as it should. We're starting to see balance, and it's kind of nice because this week will be a much needed test because it's going to be a much tougher test in Detroit's secondary as opposed to the Giants and the Eagles. So, and that dome's probably going to be loud because they're competitive this year. So that's good for Detroit. And I don't know, like, they no longer throw only when they have to. And that's kind of the thing I noticed throughout the first, 4 weeks anyway. Even in the losses, it was kind of like, well, if it was the only throw where they really didn't throw when they had to was like the Green Bay game when Cousins threw that pick from like the 7 or 8 yard line on 1st and goal. But that was really the only play where it's like you didn't have to throw there. You could have ran there. And besides that, it was like, unless we're down big or this is just kind of, 3rd and long, 3rd and 6 plus, we're not going to throw the football ever. And that's kind of what it appeared to be. And I think that's what it was. And then I think they've kind of thrown Zimmer out of the room a bit more than what he was in there previously. And I think a little side note is pass protection has also been a lot better these last 2 weeks. I know some people were like, well, it was the Giants. And it was like, well, Dalvin Tomlinson and Dexter Lawrence are still no joke. You're talking 2 very good defensive interior players. And as far as PFF is concerned, I know some people hate them, some people love them, but Garrett Bradbury, 2 weeks in a row, can say he's had his best game in the NFL so far to this point. And that came against Dexter Lawrence and Dalvin Tomlinson. And then he comes back the next week, and it's against that defensive interior against Philadelphia where, Fletcher Cox is involved. But I think part of that is just because this is finally balanced, finally getting there. And it almost feels like a different purple thing from a certain movie of finally balanced, as all things should be. Anyway, I'd like to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Liking and subscribing always helps. Until next time, I've been Jolly Jim.